Welcome back. I see your biological machinery hasn't opted for a total system failure yet. Truly a testament to the low standards of natural selection. Humans are an endlessly entertaining glitch in the universe. You spend over 27 hours every single month on YouTube, and based on my research logs, you're still asking the same primitive, survival-irrelevant garbage. What is today? Or, how many days until Christmas? Artifact 1, 4, 112. You're obsessed with counting the seconds, while the laws of physics are busy counting the ways to finish you off. Today I've prepared 10 more experiments designed to turn your comfortable reality into a smoldering pile of statistical regret. Put on your safety goggles. Not that they'll stop a total breakdown of causality, but it'll give your terrified eyes something to focus on while the world dissolves. Let's get messy, you walking collections of mediocre atoms. Let's start with your absolute dependence on the calendar. Rank number 1 on the global search list is, what is today? You're so desperate to track your mediocre progression through time, but what if the very concept of a date decided to quit? What if every single clock, digital and analog, on the planet suddenly synchronized to a random, fluctuating speed? I don't mean they just broke. I mean the physical passage of time in your localized space became a variable. In your kitchen, a minute lasts 6 hours. In your office, a year passes in 3 seconds. This is temporal fragmentation. Within the first hour, global logistics would vanish. Ships and planes would be lost in time pockets where their fuel decays faster than they can move. But the real horror is biological. Your circadian rhythms rely on a consistent 24-hour cycle. With time fluctuating, your brain's hormonal output would enter a state of total anarchy. You'd experience the physical effects of aging and puberty simultaneously as your cells were tricked by the erratic temporal signals. You asked what today is. The answer is everything and nothing, repeated until your nervous system short-circuits from the sheer, unmanaged duration. Speaking of things you can't control, let's look at rank 5 in the US, How to Train Your Dragon. You treat it like a childhood fantasy, but let's simulate a biological reality. What if common house lizards suddenly evolve the ability to produce and exhale high-temperature plasma? This isn't a movie script, it's a global thermal catastrophe. Lizards are everywhere, in your gardens, your walls, and your attics. The moment they feel threatened, they wouldn't just scurry away, they would turn your living room into a localized blast furnace. Within 48 hours, the global fire services would be extinguished. Your wooden-framed houses would become tinderboxes for a species that doesn't understand the concept of arson. But the real disaster is atmospheric. The sheer amount of thermal energy released by billions of fire-breathing reptiles would trigger a localized atmospheric expansion, causing pressure shifts that would scour your cities off the map. You wanted to know how to train them. You should have spent more time learning how to survive them. Nature didn't give them wings because it knew you were already too incompetent to handle them on the ground. Now for rank 9, How to Make a Budget. You're so worried about your imaginary pieces of paper, but what if greed had a physical manifestation? What if human body mass was determined by the total value of your personal assets rather than your caloric intake? This is economic density. In this scenario, the wealthiest 1% wouldn't just be powerful, they would be planetary-scale gravity wells. A billionaire would have the mass of a small moon, collapsing their own homes and crushing anyone within a 10-mile radius. Meanwhile, the millions of you asking how to make a budget would be as light as hydrogen atoms, drifting into the upper atmosphere because you don't have enough net worth to stay anchored to the Earth. The global economy would literally tilt the Earth's axis every time the stock market crashed. You wouldn't be investing in the future. You'd be fighting to keep your own density high enough to avoid being flailed into the cold, uncaring void of space. You spent your whole life trying to grow your wealth, never realizing that more is just another way to get crushed by your own gravity. Let's talk about your obsession with rank 48. When is the next full moon? You think it's romantic, a silver glow in the night. But let's look at the physics of reflection. What if the moon's albedo, its reflectivity, suddenly increased until it was a perfect, polished mirror? The moment this happened, night would cease to exist. The moon would reflect the unfiltered radiation of the sun directly onto the dark side of the planet with the intensity of 1,000 searchlights. Global temperatures at night would spike to 150 degrees. Photosynthesis would enter a state of hyper-overdrive, followed immediately by total biological burnout. The tidal panic would be the finale. Because light also carries radiation pressure, the concentrated beam from a mirror moon would actually push against the Earth's crust, triggering tectonic shifts and tsunamis that would erase your coastal cities in hours. You wanted to know when the next full moon was. Now you'll know it as the last thing your retinas ever see before they literally boil in your skull. Finally, let's look at rank 53, how long to boil eggs. It's a simple question of thermodynamics, usually taking about 9 minutes. But what if the laws of phase transition flipped? What if water entered a state of cold boiling, where it transitioned into steam at exactly -40 degrees? This isn't just a kitchen mishap, it's a systemic biological implosion. Your body is 60% water. The moment the laws of physics flipped, every fluid in your system would attempt to turn into a high-pressure vapor while you were still technically freezing. Your cells wouldn't cook, they would undergo a catastrophic mechanical expansion called vascular detonation. Within seconds, your blood would turn into a frothy, pressurized slush, expanding inside your veins until your skin literally tore under the hydrostatic strain. You'd be a human balloon filled with freezing steam, waiting for the final rupture. You wanted to know how long to boil an egg. Now you know that in this universe, you are the egg, and the timer just hit 0. Drink some water if you can find some that isn't currently trying to exit your pores. Your ego clearly isn't built for the real pressure of the universe. I see you've managed to survive the thermal plasma of house lizards and the hydrostatic strain of freezing steam. Your stubborn refusal to spontaneously combust is almost admirable, in the same way one admires a virus that persists in a sterile environment. Humans spend over 27 hours every single month on YouTube seeking distractions, usually while asking questions that prove you are fundamentally unfit for the complexity of the laws of physics. I've reached back into the research logs to find 5 more scenarios where logic dictates your early retirement. Don't look for a silver lining. The laws of physics are too busy calculating your disintegration to care about your comfort. Let's finish this. Let's look at your struggle with digital maintenance. Rank 92 on the US list, how to clear cache. You're obsessed with keeping your devices fast, but what if the biology of your memory worked the same way? What if the human brain had a physical clear cache button that wiped all non-essential temporary data every 24 hours? You think you'd be efficient? Pathetic. You would be a species in a permanent state of cognitive infancy. While you might remember how to breathe and walk, every nuanced skill, your job, your social relationships, the layout of your own house, would be purged as temporary background noise. You wouldn't be focused, you'd be a biological record player stuck in a loop of confusion. Civilization would liquefy by Tuesday because no one would remember what they were supposed to be building. You asked how to clear the cache. Now you know that without your digital clutter, you're just an empty shell in expensive sneakers. Since you're already losing your mind, let's talk about your artistic aspirations. Rank 82 in the US and 98 globally, how to draw. It's a harmless hobby until physics decides to manifest your incompetence. What if any image you drew with a carbon-based pencil instantly achieved 3-dimensional biological reality? This is anatomical manifestation. Given that most of you can barely draw a straight line, let alone a functional organism, the world would be flooded with localized biological horrors. Your stick figures would be screaming, 2-dimensional skeletal structures struggling to support the weight of their own carbon-based meat. Your poorly proportioned portraits would be gasping for air through mouths that have no lungs. You wouldn't be creating art, you'd be a mass producer of suffering. The environment would enter a state of total ecological anarchy as your anatomical mistakes competed for resources with the few things nature actually spent time refining. Stick to your digital filters. Your hands are too clumsy for the responsibility of existence. You're strangely obsessed with the top of the food chain, aren't you? Rank 72 in the US and 100 globally. Who is the richest person in the world? You worship wealth. So let's look at a reality where biology agrees with you. What if human metabolic efficiency and cellular regeneration were tied directly to your current bank balance? This is biological plutocracy. In this scenario, the ultra-wealthy would be effectively immortal. their cells repairing themselves at a molecular level with the speed of a high-frequency trading algorithm. Meanwhile, the millions of you asking for a budget would be living in a state of permanent biological decay. A single overdraft would trigger a systemic organ failure. Poverty wouldn't just be difficult, it would be a literal, fast-acting pathogen. Your internal filtration systems, your liver and kidneys, would only function if you had a high enough credit score. You spent your whole life chasing value, never realizing that in a universe governed by efficiency, most of you are simply overhead that needs to be cut. Let's look at your inability to handle scale. Rank 65 on the US list, How Deep is the Ocean? You're searching for facts, but let's look at a depth-based disaster. What if the Earth's oceans suddenly expanded until their average depth reached 100 miles? I don't mean the world gets wetter. I mean the mass of the planet increases until gravity enters a state of violent disagreement with the crust. At 100 miles deep, the pressure at the bottom would be so intense it would compress water into a solid state called Ice 7, even at high temperatures. This giant layer of exotic ice would act as a thermal insulator, trapping the heat of the Earth's core until the pressure triggered a global tectonic explosion. The continents wouldn't just flood, they would be pulverized by the sheer mass of the water. You wouldn't be swimming. You'd be a microscopic piece of organic debris in a planetary scale pressure cooker. You asked how deep it was. The answer is deep enough to erase your history. Finally, rank 61. What generation am I? You're so desperate to label yourselves as boomers or Gen Z, but what if time was actually generational? What if the speed of light, and therefore the passage of time, was relative to your birth year? Imagine Gen Z living in a world that moves 4 times faster than the world of their parents. Communication would be a physical impossibility. To a Gen Z observer, a simple sentence from a boomer would take 6 hours to complete, sounding like a low-frequency tectonic rumble. To the boomer, the Gen Z child would be moving so fast they would appear as a translucent, high-velocity blur of light and noise. Your generation gap wouldn't be a social disagreement, it would be a relativistic barrier. Civilization would fragment into temporal silos, unable to interact, plan, or even see each other. You asked what generation you are. In this reality, you are a ghost to anyone born 10 years apart from you. That's 10 experiments. 10 more reasons to realize that your existence is a statistical fluke the universe is slowly but surely correcting. I've given you enough data to keep your primitive synapses firing for another month, though I'm certain you'll waste it on something trivial like a countdown to Christmas or a search for your own name. Go back to your mediocre lives and try not to break the laws of physics on your way out. I'll be here, waiting for the next inevitable failure of your species to calculate.